Dear learners, Namaskar. I am Dr. Shweta and today we are going to continue our discussion on how psychologists study. As we know, we have already discussed about the goals of psychological research, different kinds of researches which is basic research and applied research, as well as we have already discussed about one of the psychological methods which is used by psychologists and known as experimental method. Experimental method, no doubt, is the preferred method in psychology because it has greater precision. But many a times we face problems that cannot be subject to experimental manipulation. For example, behavior of people in a crowd cannot be brought to laboratory conditions. Such situations require different methods. These methods are known as non-experimental methods. So, the objective of today's discussion are to familiarize you with non-experimental methods used by psychologists and also to know about the different tools that are used by psychologists while conducting the researches. Let's start our discussion with first of the non-experimental method known as the observation method in psychology. As we all know, observation is the starting point for all sciences. It is a study of spontaneous occurrences at the time they occur. But simply observing may not be enough. One should know what one wants to observe. Otherwise, a lot of data may be missed. That means we need to be very particular about what has to be observed. In psychological studies, we use naturalistic as well as controlled observations. There is another kind of observation which is called participant observation, in which the observer observes by being a part of the group. Say for example, if one wants to study the behavior of students in the class, so in the participant observation method, one has to be a participant with the students in the class in order to understand the behavior of students. The next non-experimental method in psychology is known as introspection. As the name suggests, introspect means to look within. It is a very important method to understand the feelings of pain, happiness, fatigue, etc. For example, you meet a schoolmate after years. You greet him by shaking hands, which is an act of friendly behavior. But inside you may not feel happy to meet him because he had bullied you in the class. So, what is introspection? Introspection helps us to look within us in order to understand the true feelings that is going on. That is what the psychologists do. They help the subject to look within in order to understand the true feelings. Another non-experimental method used by psychologists is known as survey method. It is for the study of social problems such as incidences of alcoholism, popularity of certain careers, causes of unsuccessful marriages. People cannot be manipulated to observe these problems because these problems are already existing naturally. Psychologists go into the field with prepared list of questions and interview schedules to a group of people. For example, when we talk about surveys, we know that lot of surveys go around in the television as well. For example, people may want to know that what kind of products people use on the daily basis in their homes and what do they feel about it. So, they go with well prepared questions in order to know the answers or the bent of mind of people or their buying preferences. Psychologists may want to know how many people are buying a certain brand of toothpaste. The surveyor may sometimes face problems like refusal of people to answer questions because all the time people are not free, biased answers or misleading answers, etc. A carefully conducted survey provides information about the trend in a particular area of concern. We have already seen that Lot of surveys happen during the election times also, which are known as exit polls, where the information is collected regarding which party is probably winning. So, this is also done by the survey method. Case history method is another non-experimental method that is used by psychologists. Now, what do we mean by case history method? Case history is a detailed compilation of data about a single individual. A psychologist may gather complete history from infancy to present period in order to understand a person's behavior. This method is often used to study abnormal behavior, behavior of criminals, problem children, or even to study the developmental changes in personality. The focus in case history method is on the assets as well as the weaknesses that the person carries with himself or herself. In different settings also, we see that how the case history is being collected. For example, when we go to a doctor with certain problem, the doctor first writes the case history of the individual in order to understand the depth of the problem. Correlational research is one of the very important non-experimental researches conducted by psychologists. Now, what is correlational research? It is used to find out the relationship between two set of factors or variables. We have already discussed what are variables in the previous videos. This method is used to find out the relationship of intelligence with scholastic achievement, language skills with examination performance, etc. The strength of relationship can be represented by a correlation coefficient which ranges from -1 to +1. This is, that is, what is the relationship between two things can occur between -1 to +1. In order to understand the correlation research, we have one example. Here, two penguins are discussing that, do you think all these film crews brought on global warming, or did global warming bring on all these film crews? That means, what is the relationship between film crews that go into such places with the global warming, or the global warming's relationship with the film crews? A positive correlation indicates that as the value of one variable increases, the value of other also increases. For example, if scholastic achievement increases, the performance also increases. A negative correlation tells that as the value of one variable increases, the value of other variable decreases. For example, as stress increases, the scholastic achievement decreases. So, this means there is a certain relationship between these two variables. But correlation research cannot demonstrate cause and effect relationship. For example, when I discussed scholastic achievement and the performance of the learner, which means that there is a positive relation. If the scholastic achievement is increasing, the performances also increases. That means there is a positive relationship. But what is the cause and what is the effect? Whether scholastic achievement is helping to perform well, or performing well is helping to have good scholastic achievement. This is not done by correlational research. That means the answer cannot be given by correlational research, which is cause and effect relationship. But yes, it gives new insights about the phenomena under study. So, these were certain non-experimental methods that psychologists use while conducting their psychological researches. Let's come down to the next objective of today's program, which is the different psychological tools that psychologists use while conducting their studies. So, while undertaking studies, psychologists use a variety of tools to collect relevant data. These tools or instruments are of various kinds and are used for various purposes. For example, memory drum and stethoscope are frequently used in the studies of memory and perception. Let's have a look at memory drum and digestoscope. So, memory drum is often used in the experiments that are related to the memory, and digestoscope is preferably used when one wants to know maybe the attention span or the perception of the subject under study. There are other psychological tools also, for example, EEG, ECG, PET, GSR, MRI, fMRI, etc. that are used in the study of neuropsychological functioning. These electronic and electrical gadgets help to make the presentation of stimuli and recording of responses. Tape recorders and video recordings are also used while conducting psychological researches. For example, this is an image of an electroencephalogram, which is EEG, where how electrodes are put into the skull and readings are noted on the screen in order to know the brain activity. Apart from these, there are paper and pencil tests that are used as measures to access various psychological attributes. Questionnaires and interview schedules are also used while conducting psychological researches. In order to elicit information from people, psychologists and other social scientists use questionnaires which are mailed or interview schedules which are presented by the researchers himself or herself in person. The questions may be open-ended or closed-ended. What is open-ended question? The open-ended question provides freedom to the respondent to answer the way he or she likes, but the closed-ended question have fixed answers and the respondent is required to choose out of the given responses only. For example, in the closed-ended question, you are required to answer either yes or no, whereas in the open-ended question, you are free to write whatever is going on in your mind about a particular phenomena. Psychometric tests. As a learner of psychology, it is essential to be familiar with intelligence tests, personality tests, aptitude tests, interest inventories and many other similar psychological tools. These tests provide measurement of the individual differences. A test is a standardized measure of sample of behaviors and attributes. These tests are used to determine the status of the person being assessed on an attribute relative to the community of people on which the test has been standardized, which means that when I say relative to the community of people on which the test has been standardized, for example, I want to understand the behavior of a 2-year-old child. So, in order to know the behavior of a 2-year child, whatever result I come up with, I have to compare those results with other 2 years behavior. In order to be useful, the test must have several features. What are those several features? That is, certain characteristics of psychological tests exist. First characteristics is reliability. When we talk about reliability, it refers to the consistency of a test. For example, if a person is found to be above average intelligence in today's test, then he or she shall also show the same level of intelligence after 3 months. That means his or her intelligence should be above average after 3 months time also. This is known as retest reliability. There is another kind of reliability which is called internal consistency, which indicates the degree to which the different items or the different questions of a test are related to each other. That means all the questions should be covering the same aspect under study. So, when I talk about test-retest reliability, here we can see that the customer n time 1 is equals to customer n time 2. That means if certain individual is tested today and has certain result is equal to the same individual having the same result at some another time. And when I talk about internal consistency, as I have already discussed, that different items should relate to each other. That means attribute 1 is equal to attribute 2 is equal to attribute n. That means all the items are covering the same area under study, for example, intelligence. Another characteristics of test is known as validity. When I say validity, a test is valid if it measures the same property for which it has been prepared. For example, a test of intelligence is valid if it measures intelligence and not interest or personality of an individual. Another important characteristic is norms. Norms refer to the scores obtained by a group which works as a reference point. I just discussed in the previous slide that the behavior of a 2-year infant has to be compared with the relative population. So, here comes the answer, which is norms. The score of a test is meaningful in the context of scores obtained by other persons belonging to the same situation. A psychological test score is a relative score. It is therefore necessary to develop norms for the test. Norms help to interpret the test scores. So, when I said relative score, for example, you want to understand the behavior of an adolescent. So, relative score is I have to compare the results with the population of adolescents only. There are certain tests that are known as projective tests or techniques that are taken up by the psychologist while studying the individual. This includes a variety of tasks which are unstructured or ambiguous. That is, nothing is clear. No direct questions are there in such techniques. The performance of a person on these tasks cannot be used in any direct manner. The performance is viewed as projection of the psychological attribute under consideration. I will explain how. In other words, these tests provide indirect assessment of psychological property and the investigator interprets the obvious behavioral expressions or performance. Some of the famous projective tests include Rorschach's in-block test and Murray's thematic apperception test, which is also known as TAT. Rorschach's in-block test. In Rorschach's ink-block test, a person is shown a set of ink blocks and is required to identify what the blot represents or what are various objects that are seen. The responses obtained from a person are used to discover his or her personality. This test is frequently used in clinical settings. For example, these are certain cards that are there in the Rorschach's ink-block test. In Rorschach's ink-block test, there are certain cards that are presented to the individual. Say for example, if I take card 2 and I ask the participant that what do you see? One participant might see humans in the picture, another participant can see animals in the picture. Some other participant can find out that these are certain weird creatures in the picture. So, based on the responses of the individual, the personality is assessed about that particular individual. That is, what does he see in this card is a projection of his or her psychological attribute. Now, if I talk about another projective technique, which is thematic apperception test, then it consists of a set of pictures and the respondent is required to write about the pictures. These stories are then interpreted to understand the personality of the person. For example, this is one picture. So in thematic perception test, this picture is shown to an individual and he or she is required to write a story on this picture. Based on the content which is written in the story, the personality of an individual is assessed. So these were some of the non-experimental method and various psychological tools that are taken up by psychologists while undertaking the psychological studies. This was all for today's discussion. Thank you.
जीवन ये प्रकाशित करने, राहों को आलोकित करने, हम अपना दीपक स्वयं बने, हम अपना रास्ता स्वयं चुने।
धन साधन समय की सीमा से विद्यालय जो मुक्त हो, धन साधन समय की सीमा से विद्यालय जो मुक्त हो।
कभी पढ़े हम कहीं पढ़े, वे विषय की लोच से युक्त हो। मित्रों हम उठे और जागे,
मंजिल आने की ध्वनि सुने, हम अपना दीपक स्वयं बने, हम अपना रास्ता स्वयं चुने, कोई मन चाहा केंद्र चुने, स्वयं बने, हम
घर बैठे पाएं राष्ट्रीय मुक्त विद्यालय शिक्षा संस्थान यानी NIOS में एडमिशन, वो भी एकदम आसान तरीके से, जिससे शिक्षार्थियों को होगी समय और धन दोनों की बचत। NIOS से शिक्षा कभी भी कहीं भी। शिक्षार्थियों, क्या आप जानते हैं NIOS में एडमिशन लेने का सरल और सुगम तरीका, जिससे शिक्षार्थियों को ऑनलाइन प्रवेश लेने में सहूलियत मिलती है। NIOS में प्रवेश की प्रक्रिया पूर्णतया ऑनलाइन है। शिक्षार्थी घर बैठे इंटरनेट द्वारा प्रवेश के लिए सबसे पहले NIOS की वेबसाइट www.nios.ac.in पर लॉगिन करें। अपना ईमेल आईडी और पासवर्ड डालकर अपना पंजीकरण करें। पंजीकरण के बाद लॉगिन करने पर ऑनलाइन प्रवेश हेतु आवेदन पत्र खुलेगा। आवेदन पत्र को निर्देशानुसार भरें और प्रिंट आउट लें। इस प्रिंट आउट पर अपनी फोटो संलग्न करें। ऑनलाइन प्रवेश के लिए शुल्क हेतु भुगतान के तरीके हैं: क्रेडिट कार्ड के द्वारा, डेबिट कार्ड के द्वारा, राष्ट्रीयकृत बैंक के ड्राफ्ट के माध्यम से, जो कि सचिव NIOS नई दिल्ली या नोएडा के पक्ष में देय हो। भरे हुए आवेदन पत्र के साथ साथ डिमांड ड्राफ्ट और संलग्न किए जाने वाले दस्तावेज हैं: जन्म रजिस्ट्रार के जिला कार्यालय से जारी जन्म प्रमाण पत्र की सत्यापित प्रति, जिसमें जन्म तिथि अंकित हो, पिछले विद्यालय से प्राप्त विद्यालय छोड़ने का प्रमाण पत्र, जिसमें आवेदक की जन्म तिथि लिखी हो, प्रवेश फॉर्म का प्रिंट आउट NIOS के संबद्ध क्षेत्रीय केंद्रों पर 10 दिनों में पहुंच जाना चाहिए। अन्यथा उचित दस्तावेज न लगे होने पर आवेदन फॉर्म रद्द किया जा सकता है। प्रवेश प्रक्रिया की पुष्टि होने के बाद शिक्षार्थियों को परिचय पत्र व अध्ययन सामग्री डाक द्वारा तुरंत पहुंचाई जाती है। ऑनलाइन प्रवेश एक बहुत ही सुगम और सुविधाजनक प्रवेश प्रणाली है। ऑनलाइन ऑन टाइम फॉर सेफ एंड सिक्योर एडमिशन।
जीवन ये प्रकाशित करने, राहों को आलोकित करने।
जीवन ये प्रकाशित करने, राहों को आलोकित करने। हम अपना दीपक स्वयं बने, हम अपना रास्ता स्वयं चुने।
अपना दीपक स्वयं बने, हम अपना रास्ता स्वयं चुने।
जीवन ये प्रकाशित करने, राहों को आलोकित करने।
धन साधन समय की सीमा से विद्यालय जो मुक्त हो।
धन साधन समय की सीमा से विद्यालय जो मुक्त हो।
कभी पढ़े हम कहीं पढ़े, वे विषय की लोच से युक्त हो।
कभी पढ़े हम कहीं पढ़े, वे विषय की लोच से युक्त हो।
मित्रों हम उठे और जागे,
मंजिल आने की ध्वनि सुने। हम अपना दीपक स्वयं बने, हम अपना रास्ता स्वयं चुने।
जीवन ये प्रकाशित करने, राहों को आलोकित करने।
राष्ट्रीय मुक्त विद्यालय का है द्वार खुला सबकी खातिर।
शिक्षा परीक्षा का अवसर एक बार ही क्यों मिलता फिर।
शिक्षा और परीक्षा का अवसर एक बार ही क्यों मिलता